The morning sun cut across the Naval Special Warfare Training Facility like a blade, casting long shadows over the range where Lieutenant Kira Brennan stood alone. The air smelled of gun, oil, and desert sage, familiar scents that should have calmed her nerves but only sharpened her focus. Around her, clusters of Navy SEALs gathered in small groups, their low voices carrying across the concrete as they watched her with barely concealed amusement. She could feel every pair of eyes on her back, weighing her, measuring her, finding her lacking before she had even begun. It was nothing new. The doubt had followed her through every door she had ever opened in her military career, a constant shadow that no amount of excellence seemed to banish completely. Admiral Garrett Harlow stood near the observation tower, his arms crossed over his barrel chest, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. He was a legend in the SEAL community, a man whose reputation had been built on 3 decades of combat operations and an old-school mentality that had never quite evolved with the times. His silver hair gleamed in the sunlight as he leaned toward Commander Vincent Thorne, whispering something that made both men chuckle. Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've seen women breaking barriers in your community too. Kira adjusted the weight of her tactical vest, her fingers moving with practiced precision over each piece of gear. The demonstration day had been scheduled for months, an opportunity for the brass to observe the latest candidates being considered for advanced SEAL operations. She was the only woman in the lineup, a fact that had generated more attention than she wanted and far more skepticism than she deserved. Lieutenant Callan Reeves stepped past her, his shoulder deliberately bumping hers as he moved toward his own firing position. He did not apologize, did not even acknowledge her presence beyond a derisive snort that his buddies found hilarious. She had dealt with men like Reeves throughout her career, operators who saw her gender before they saw her record, who measured her worth by standards that had nothing to do with capability. The other candidates were running through their final equipment checks, their movements efficient and confident. Chief Petty Officer Dax Merrick caught her eye briefly, offering the smallest nod of acknowledgement. It was not friendship, not exactly, but it was something closer to professional respect than most of the others had shown her. She returned the nod, grateful for even that small gesture. Admiral Harlow pushed away from the tower, his boots heavy on the ground as he approached the lineup. His presence commanded attention, decades of authority radiating from every purposeful step. He walked slowly down the line, pausing briefly before each candidate, offering words of encouragement or challenge depending on his mood. When he reached Kira, he stopped completely, his eyes traveling from her boots to her face with undisguised skepticism. "So," he said, his voice loud enough to carry to the observers behind him, "you're the one everyone has been talking about. The diversity hire who thinks she can run with the big dogs." Kira kept her expression neutral, her spine straight, her eyes focused on the middle distance. She had learned long ago not to rise to the bait, not to give men like Harlow the satisfaction of seeing her react. Her record spoke for itself, even if he refused to hear it. The Admiral circled her slowly, like a predator assessing prey. "What is your call sign, Lieutenant?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "I want to know what name you think you have earned." The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication and mockery. Kira felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders, but her mind drifted backward, pulling her into memories that had shaped every step of her journey to this concrete range under the unforgiving Nevada sun. She was 7 years old again, standing in her father's study at Fort Bragg, her small hands gripping the edge of his massive oak desk. Colonel Pierce Brennan had just returned from a deployment she had not been allowed to know about, his face lined with exhaustion, but his eyes still sharp as flint. He had found her there, staring at the wall of commendations and photographs that told the story of 3 generations of military service. "You want to be like them," he had said, not as a question, but as an observation. She had nodded, unable to find words big enough to contain the fierce determination burning in her chest. He had knelt beside her then, his calloused hand gentle on her shoulder. "Then you need to understand something, Kira. The world will tell you no 1,000 times before it tells you yes once. You'll have to be twice as good to be considered half as worthy. That is not fair, but it is true. The memory dissolved as Admiral Harlow cleared his throat impatiently, bringing her back to the present. She had spent the years since that conversation proving her father right, fighting for every inch of ground in a world that had never been designed to make room for her. The Naval Academy had been brutal, not because of the physical demands, but because of the constant scrutiny, the endless whispers that she had only been admitted to fill a quota. Her instructors had watched her differently than they watched the male midshipman, looking for weakness, for failure, for any excuse to confirm their preconceptions. She had given them none. Every run, she finished first. Every exam, she scored highest. Every challenge, she met with a determination that bordered on obsession. It still had not been enough for some of them. Basic underwater demolition training had nearly broken her, not from the physical punishment, but from the isolation. The other candidates had formed bonds in the cold ocean water and the endless mud, connections forged through shared suffering. She had suffered alone. Watching those bonds form around her like walls she could not breach. When she had finally earned her trident, there had been no celebration, only the grim satisfaction of having survived something designed to destroy her. Her first deployment had been to the Horn of Africa, attached to a SEAL team that had made it abundantly clear they had not requested her presence. The team leader, a grizzled operator named Sullivan, had pulled her aside on the first day. "I did not ask for you," he had told her bluntly, "and I do not want you here. But you are here, so you better keep up and stay out of the way." She had done more than keep up. During a hostage rescue operation that had gone sideways, when the team had been pinned down by enemy fire and their extraction had been compromised, she had been the one to identify an alternative route through a network of underground tunnels. She had been the first one through those tunnels, her weapon up, her breathing controlled, leading the team and the hostages to safety while bullets chewed up the street above their heads. Sullivan had never apologized, never acknowledged that he had been wrong about her, but he had stopped treating her like a liability. That was as close to acceptance as she had gotten, and she had learned to count it as a victory. The second deployment had been worse. Afghanistan, embedded with a team that had lost 2 operators in the previous month. They had been raw with grief and rage, looking for someone to blame, and she had been convenient. Every mistake, every setback, every moment of bad luck had been laid at her feet. The fact that she was a woman became their explanation for everything that went wrong, as if her presence alone had cursed the mission. Until the night they had walked into an ambush in the Karengal Valley. Until she had put down 4 enemy combatants with 4 shots, while half the team was still processing the fact that they were under fire. Until she had dragged their wounded point man back to cover while rounds kicked up dirt around her boots. After that night, the blame had stopped, but the distance had remained. Admiral Harlow was still waiting, his patience clearly worn thin. Around them, the other candidates had gone quiet, sensing the tension crackling in the desert air. Commander Thorne had moved closer, his expression curious now rather than amused. Even Lieutenant Reeves had stopped his posturing, watching to see how this confrontation would resolve itself. Kira met the Admiral's eyes directly, her voice steady and clear. "Iron Widow, sir," she said. "My call sign is Iron Widow." The silence that followed her words stretched thin as wire. "Iron Widow." The call sign landed between them like a stone dropped into still water, ripples of recognition spreading through some of the observers, while others remained oblivious to its significance. Admiral Harlow's eyebrows rose slightly, the only indication that he had heard something unexpected, but his smirk never wavered. "Iron Widow," he repeated slowly, drawing out each syllable as if tasting something bitter. "That is quite the dramatic call sign, Lieutenant. Did you pick that yourself? Or did someone feel sorry for you and try to make you sound dangerous?" Laughter erupted from several of the candidates behind her. Lieutenant Reeves was practically doubled over, slapping Chief Merrick on the shoulder as if the Admiral had delivered the finest joke he had ever heard. Even some of the observing officers chuckled, though a few had the decency to look uncomfortable with the open mockery. Commander Thorne stepped forward, his tablet computer in hand, swiping through screens with quick efficiency. "Sir," he said quietly, "there might be more to this than we realize. I'm seeing some interesting flags in her file. The Admiral waved him off without looking, his attention still fixed on Kira. I am sure her file is full of participation trophies and accommodations for physical standards, Commander. What I want to know is whether she can actually perform when it matters. Kira remained motionless, her jaw tight, but her expression neutral. She had learned this dance long ago, the careful balance between defending herself and proving she was too emotional, too sensitive, too female for the job. Silence was often the only weapon she had that they could not turn against her. The Admiral began to pace, his boots grinding small stones beneath his heels. You know what, Lieutenant Iron Widow, I think we should put on a little demonstration for everyone here today. Nothing too complicated, just a simple combat scenario that we use to evaluate our top-tier operators. If you're going to wear a call sign that dramatic, you better be able to back it up. He turned to face the assembled group, his voice rising to carry across the range. Gentlemen, we're going to run Course Delta. Full combat load, live fire, and every failure point activated. Lieutenant Brennan here is going to show us exactly what Iron Widow means. The mood shifted instantly. Course Delta was legendary within the SEAL community, a nightmare scenario that had been designed by combat veterans to test every aspect of an operator's skill set under maximum stress. It combined precision marksmanship with tactical decision-making and physical endurance, all compressed into a 15-minute window where a single mistake could cascade into complete failure. Kira had heard stories about Course Delta during her training. Experienced operators with multiple deployments had failed it. Some had barely made it through. It was used sparingly, reserved for candidates being considered for the most elite assignments, and it was never sprung on someone without preparation time. Reese had stopped laughing. Even his face had gone pale as he glanced toward the course infrastructure visible in the distance. Chief Merrick muttered something under his breath that might have been a prayer or a curse. Commander Thorne looked up from his tablet, his expression genuinely concerned now. Sir, Thorne began, his voice careful, Course Delta is typically reserved for candidates who have completed the full preparation protocol. Lieutenant Brennan has not been briefed on the scenario parameters or the target array configuration. Admiral Harlow smiled, and there was nothing kind in it. Then I guess Iron Widow here will have to adapt and overcome, just like we expect all SEALs to do in the field. Unless she would prefer to withdraw and admit that her call sign is just for show. The trap was perfectly constructed. If she refused, she would confirm every doubt and prejudice he carried. If she accepted, she would be walking into a scenario designed to humble even the most skilled operators, with no preparation and the weight of public failure hanging over her head. The Admiral knew exactly what he was doing, and he was enjoying it. Kira took a slow breath, centering herself the way her father had taught her years ago. She thought about all the doors that had been slammed in her face, all the tests that had been rigged against her, all the moments when she had been expected to fail and had refused to give anyone that satisfaction. This was just one more door, one more test, one more moment where the world was betting against her. She met the Admiral's eyes and did not blink. I accept, sir, she said, her voice steady. I am ready to run Course Delta whenever you give the order. The Admiral's smile widened. Outstanding, Lieutenant. Gear up. You have 10 minutes to prepare. Then we will see what you are really made of. He turned to the assembled group, his voice booming with false enthusiasm. Everyone to the observation tower. This should be educational. As the crowd began to disperse, Commander Thorne lingered for a moment, his expression troubled. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then seemed to think better of it and walked away. Chief Merrick caught her eye as he passed, and this time there was something different in his look, something that might have been respect or might have been pity. She could not tell which, and it did not matter. In 10 minutes, she would be alone on that course, and all that would matter was whether she could survive what came next. The armory smelled of cosmoline and leather, familiar scents that grounded Kira as she moved through her equipment check with mechanical precision. Her hands knew the ritual, had performed it hundreds of times in dozens of countries under every kind of pressure. Magazine inserted, bolt checked, optics verified, sling adjusted to exactly the right tension. Each movement was deliberate, each breath measured and controlled. Through the armory window, she could see the observation tower filling with bodies. Word had spread fast. This was no longer just a scheduled demonstration day, but something far more interesting. A spectacle. Entertainment. The woman who thought she belonged was about to be put in her place, and everyone wanted a front-row seat to watch it happen. A ranged safety officer appeared in the doorway, a weathered chief with kind eyes who had seen too many careers end on courses like this one. "You do not have to do this," he said quietly. "Nobody would blame you for walking away from a known scenario. Harlow is setting you up to fail." Kira slid a fresh magazine into her vest pouch, checking the rounds with a practiced touch. "I know, Chief, but walking away just proves him right. At least this way, I get to take my shot." The chief nodded slowly, respect flickering across his features. "Then you should know what you are walking into. Course Delta has 3 critical engagement points. They call them the 3 widows because they have ended so many careers. Each one tests a different aspect of combat capability under conditions designed to break your decision-making process." He pulled out a battered notepad and sketched quick diagrams. First widow is a hostage scenario at 75 meters. 3 targets, 2 hostiles, and 1 friendly, constantly moving in overlapping patterns. You get 1 chance to make the shot. Hit the friendly, you fail immediately. Miss both hostiles, you fail. Average completion time for experienced operators is 45 seconds of observation before they take the shot. Most fail because they rush it. Kira studied the sketch, her mind already running scenarios and calculating angles. What is the second one? Second widow is moving targets at variable distances while you are under simulated combat stress. Strobe lights, smoke, audio distraction designed to sound like incoming fire. Targets appear at random intervals between 50 and 200 meters. You need to engage 5 targets with 5 rounds in under 90 seconds. The record is 73 seconds, set by a DevGru operator who had run the course 3 times before. And the third? The chief paused, his expression grave. Third widow is what they call the Legend Maker. Single target at 870 meters, wind variable, elevated position with unstable shooting platform. You get 1 round. Just 1. The target is a 6-inch circle. In 5 years, only 2 operators have made that shot on their first attempt. Most operators fail the course before they even get there. Kira absorbed the information, feeling the weight of what she was about to attempt. 3 shots, 3 impossible scenarios, 3 opportunities to fail in front of everyone who had ever doubted her. The odds were astronomical. And that was exactly what Admiral Harlow was counting on. The range safety officer keyed his radio. "Control, this is range safety alpha. Candidate is prepared and moving to start position." The walk from the armory to the course entrance felt longer than any patrol she had ever walked in hostile territory. The sun had climbed higher, turning the Nevada desert into a furnace that shimmered with heat distortion. Her gears settled against her body with familiar weight, each piece exactly where it needed to be. Her rifle hung at low ready, an extension of her will and intention. The observation tower loomed to her left, packed with faces she mostly did not recognize and a few she knew too well. Admiral Harlow stood at the rail, his arms crossed, his expression one of smug anticipation. Commander Thorne stood beside him, still scrolling through his tablet, his brow furrowed with concentration. Lieutenant Reeves was visible in the back, grinning like a man watching his favorite entertainment. She reached the start line, a strip of red paint on the concrete that had been crossed by hundreds of operators before her. Some had succeeded. Most had not. The course stretched before her, a maze of walls and obstacles and hidden challenges that she could only partially see from this vantage point. A voice crackled over the loudspeakers, impersonal and mechanical. "Candidate Brennan, this is course control. You will have 15 minutes to complete all 3 engagement phases. Failure at any phase terminates the exercise immediately. Safety protocols are active. Range is hot. You may begin on the signal." Admiral Harlow leaned over the rail, his voice carrying across the distance. "One more thing, Lieutenant Iron Widow. Everyone here has access to the live feed from the course cameras. We will all be watching every move you make, every decision you take. No pressure. Laughter rippled through the observation tower. Kira did not look up, did not acknowledge the comment. Her focus had narrowed to the course ahead, to the challenges waiting in the heat and dust and unforgiving geometry of this place designed to break operators who thought they were unbreakable. The signal tone blared across the range, sharp and definitive. Kira moved forward, her body falling into the practiced rhythm of tactical movement. Her breathing steadied, her vision sharpened, and the noise of the watching crowd faded into irrelevance. There was only the course now, only the mission, only the 3 shots that would define everything that came after. The first obstacle came at her fast, a concrete wall that required a dynamic entry maneuver while maintaining weapon control. Kira hit it at full stride, using her momentum to pull herself up and over in one fluid motion. Her boots touched down on the far side without breaking rhythm, her rifle already coming up to scan for threats. Muscle memory took over, years of training compressing into instinct. The course twisted through a series of corridors designed to simulate urban combat environments. Narrow passages where ambush could come from any angle. Doors that might hide enemies or civilians. Windows that offered firing positions or deadly exposure. She moved through them with controlled aggression, her mind processing tactical information faster than conscious thought could follow. The radio in her ear crackled with deliberate static, an artificial distraction meant to simulate the chaos of real combat communications. Through the noise, she caught fragments of the observation feed. Admiral Harlow's voice cutting through, clinical and detached. She is moving too fast. Rushing. She will make a mistake at the first engagement point. Kira let the words slide past her awareness without taking root. What Harlow saw as rushing was actually economy of movement, the difference between wasted motion and purposeful action. Every step took her exactly where she needed to be. Every angle she checked was the angle that mattered. This was what hours in the kill house had built into her nervous system, and no amount of skepticism from the observation tower could change that. She rounded a corner and found herself at the threshold of the first widow. The scenario unfolded before her in a space roughly the size of a small apartment, 75 meters of distance compressed by the demands of precision shooting. 3 figures moved through the kill zone in patterns that seemed random, but had been carefully choreographed to create maximum difficulty. 2 hostiles wearing tactical vests and carrying replica weapons. 1 friendly in civilian clothes, hands zip-tied behind her back, eyes wide with simulated terror. The targets moved in overlapping patterns, crossing behind each other, creating brief windows of opportunity that opened and closed in heartbeats. Kira dropped to one knee, bringing her rifle up to a stable shooting position. Through her optic, the scene resolved into vectors and timing, angles and opportunity. Her breathing slowed, her heart rate dropping as her body entered the zone where performance peaked. In the observation tower, she knew they were watching her hesitate. 45 seconds was the average observation time before experienced operators took their shot. They would be counting, waiting for her to rush it, to crack under the pressure of being watched and judged. They wanted her to fail, and failure here meant potentially shooting a friendly target, a mistake that would end not just the exercise but any hope of advancement. Kira tracked the movement patterns, her mind building a predictive model from the chaos. The hostile on the left had a slight limp, barely noticeable, but enough to create a rhythm in his movement. The one on the right favored covering angles that kept him partially concealed, a tell that suggested defensive thinking rather than aggressive. The friendly moved with the jerky unpredictability of genuine fear. But even terror had patterns if you watched long enough. 20 seconds. 30. She could feel the weight of expectation pressing down from the tower, the silent countdown as they waited for her to prove every doubt correct. Her finger rested outside the trigger guard, discipline overriding the pressure to act. Then she saw it, a convergence point where the hostile on the left would clear the friendly by 18 inches while the hostile on the right moved into full exposure. A window that would last less than 2 seconds, but it was enough. Her breathing stilled. Her trigger finger moved with deliberate precision. The shot broke clean, the rifle's report sharp in the enclosed space. The hostile on the left dropped, the hit zone marked by the electronic scoring system. Her bolts cycled smoothly, chambering the next round without conscious direction. The second hostile was already moving into his pattern, but Kira had read the geometry correctly. He stepped exactly where she knew he would be. The second shot followed the first with mechanical precision. Both hostiles down, the friendly untouched and cowering against the far wall, exactly as the scenario demanded. Total elapsed time from entry to second shot, 31 seconds. 14 seconds faster than the average for experienced operators. In the observation tower, the casual chatter died. Commander Thorne looked up from his tablet, his expression shifting from curious to intensely focused. Even Lieutenant Reeves had stopped grinning, his face settling into something harder to read. Chief Merrick leaned forward against the rail, his weathered features showing the first hints of genuine interest. Admiral Harlow said nothing, but his jaw had tightened almost imperceptibly. He had expected hesitation, had counted on doubt creating paralysis. Instead, he had watched precision and confidence that spoke to hundreds of hours of training that his briefing file had apparently failed to capture. Kira rose from her shooting position, her rifle transitioning smoothly to tactical carry. The first widow was complete, one of 3 impossible challenges neutralized, but she allowed herself no celebration, no moment of satisfaction. The course was still hot, the mission still active. 2 more shots waited ahead, each more difficult than the last, and the weight of every watching I would only grow heavier with each success. She moved forward into the next section of the course, her boots steady on the concrete, her mind already shifting to the challenges that waited in the smoke and chaos of the second widow. Behind her, the observation tower buzzed with surprise conversation, but she was already gone, focused entirely on what came next. The corridor leading to the second widow filled with smoke before Kira reached the entrance. Thick gray clouds that turned the air into soup and reduced visibility to arm's length. The smoke machines were industrial grade, designed to replicate the conditions of a building fire or heavy combat obscuration. Through the chemical haze, strobe lights began to pulse in irregular patterns, disorienting flashes that destroyed depth perception and natural rhythm. Then came the sound. Speakers hidden throughout the space erupted with the recorded cacophony of combat. Automatic weapons fire, explosions, screaming voices in multiple languages, radio chatter overlapping into incomprehensible noise. The audio assault was physiologically designed to trigger stress responses, to flood the nervous system with cortisol and adrenaline until fine motor control degraded and decision-making collapsed into panic. Kira entered the chaos without hesitation. The smoke burned her throat and eyes, but she had trained in worse. The strobes tried to confuse her visual processing, but she had learned to navigate by feel and spatial memory when sight failed. The noise wanted to overwhelm her, to make thinking impossible, but years of combat had taught her how to filter signal from noise, how to find calm in the center of violence. Her rifle came up to ready position as she moved deeper into the kill zone. Somewhere in this manufactured hell, 5 targets would appear at random intervals and random distances. She had 90 seconds to identify and engage all 5. The targets would be moving, appearing from concealment for only brief windows before disappearing again. Miss 1, and the scenario became exponentially harder. Miss 2, and completion became nearly impossible. The first target materialized at 50 meters, a hostile silhouette emerging from the smoke like a ghost. Kira's rifle tracked and fired in one smooth motion, muscle memory bypassing conscious thought. The target registered the hit and dropped back into concealment. 1 down, 4 to go. Time elapsed, 8 seconds. She pressed forward, moving through the smoke with tactical discipline. The strobe lights painted everything in freeze-frame snapshots, reality broken into discontinuous images that the brain struggled to stitch together. Most operators slowed down in these conditions, their confidence eroding as their senses failed them. Kira accelerated, trusting her training more than her compromised perception. The second target appeared at 120 meters, nearly at the edge of effective visibility in the smoke. A more distant engagement than most operators would attempt in these conditions. Kira dropped to one knee, using a concrete pillar for stability. Her breathing cycle controlled the shot timing, the trigger breaking in a natural pause between heartbeats. The target fell. 2 down. Time elapsed. 29 seconds. In the observation tower, Admiral Harlow leaned forward despite himself. His smirk had faded, replaced by an expression harder to interpret. Commander Thorne was no longer looking at his tablet, but watching the multiple camera feeds with undivided attention. The other observers had gone quiet, the casual contempt replaced by something approaching professional interest. Chief Merrick muttered to Lieutenant Reeves, "She's not just surviving this. She is running it like she designed it." Reeves said nothing, but his earlier confidence had evaporated. He had run course Delta 6 months ago and barely passed after 3 attempts. Watching someone navigate the second Widow with this kind of fluid precision was humbling in ways he was not prepared to process. Kira moved to a new position, reading the geometry of the space and predicting where targets were likely to appear based on the course design philosophy. She had studied enough kill houses to understand how scenario designers thought, how they created challenge through controlled chaos. The third target would appear from an elevated position, forcing her to adjust her engagement angle while managing the unstable conditions. It materialized exactly where she anticipated, a hostile silhouette on a platform 15 feet above the ground at 90 meters. Her rifle snapped up, the optic finding the target through smoke and strobe. The shot felt perfect as it broke, the recoil management instinctive. The target registered and fell. 3 down. Time elapsed. 51 seconds. 2 targets remained, and she had 39 seconds to find them. The course designers saved the hardest scenarios for last, testing whether operators could maintain performance as physical stress accumulated and time pressure mounted. The smoke seemed thicker now, the strobes more aggressive, the noise louder. All psychological tricks, but effective ones. Kira transitioned to a new sector, her tactical movement eating up ground while maintaining readiness. The fourth target appeared at 65 meters, partially obscured behind a barrier that required her to thread the shot through a narrow window. She took it standing, her body relaxed despite the chaos, her mind processing angles with mathematical precision. The target fell. 4 down. Time elapsed. 68 seconds. 22 seconds for 1 target. The math was tight but achievable. She pressed deeper into the smoke, her rifle sweeping sectors methodically. The final target could appear anywhere within a 200-meter range, and the course designers would place it in the most difficult position possible. It appeared at maximum distance, nearly invisible in the smoke at 195 meters. A hostile silhouette barely distinguishable from the background, moving laterally at speed. The shot required leading the target, compensating for distance and movement, while standing in a strobe-lit smoke cloud with simulated combat noise hammering her concentration. Kira settled into her shooting stance, her mind calculating lead and drop with the speed of long practice. The world narrowed to the target, the reticle, the space between heartbeats where the shot lived. Her finger moved with absolute commitment. The rifle fired. Through the smoke and chaos, the target registered the hit and dropped. 5 targets. 5 shots. 73 seconds. She had matched the course record set by a DevGru operator who had run it 3 times before. On her first attempt, in conditions specifically designed to make her fail. The smoke began to clear as the scenario ended, the strobes winding down, the audio assault fading to silence. Kira stood in the center of the kill zone, her rifle at tactical ready, her breathing steady and controlled. Not a single wasted movement, not a hint of panic or doubt. In the observation tower, the silence was absolute. Admiral Harlow's face had gone carefully neutral, the smirk completely erased. Commander Thorne was scrolling through his tablet with urgent intensity, his expression suggesting he was finding information that changed the entire context of what they were witnessing. Even the most skeptical observers were leaning forward now, watching with the focus of professionals who recognized genuine excellence when they saw it. Kira moved toward the exit that led to the third widow, the Legend Maker, the shot that only 2 operators had made on their first attempt in 5 years. 2 down. 1 to go. The impossible was looking increasingly inevitable. The path to the third widow climbed upward through a series of metal staircases that rattled under Kira's boots. Each step took her higher into the desert air, away from the enclosed chaos of the previous scenarios and into the exposed vulnerability of an elevated shooting platform. The sun beat down with renewed intensity, turning metal handrails into branding irons and baking the moisture from her mouth. Her legs burned from the exertion, adrenaline beginning to fade and leave behind the accumulated cost of the previous engagements. This was part of the design, the deliberate erosion of physical capability leading into the most demanding shot of the entire course. At the top of the stairs, a platform barely large enough for 2 people jutted out over empty space. The shooting position was a metal grate that shifted slightly underfoot, an unstable foundation that would magnify every micro-movement, every breath, every heartbeat and emotion that could throw off the shot. Beyond the platform, the desert stretched away in waves of heat distortion that made the distant target shimmer like a mirage. 870 meters. More than half a mile. A 6-inch circle that would be barely visible even through her optic at this distance. 1 round. 1 chance. The Legend Maker had earned its name through the careers it had ended and the handful of legends it had created. Kira moved to the edge of the platform and dropped into a prone position, feeling the metal grate flex beneath her weight. Through her optic, she began the process of ranging the target, calculating drop and drift based on distance and conditions. The wind was variable, gusting from multiple directions as it moved across the broken terrain. Reading it accurately at this distance required experience that most shooters spent years developing. Her mind drifted, unbidden, to her father's rifle range behind their quarters at Fort Bragg. She had been 12 years old, gangly and awkward, struggling with a rifle too heavy for her frame. Her father had knelt beside her, his voice patient but firm. Long-range shooting is not about strength, Kira. It is about understanding. You have to read the wind, feel the conditions, become part of the system rather than fighting against it. She had spent years learning that lesson. Thousands of rounds fired at distances that stretched her understanding of ballistics and physics. Her father had pushed her harder than he had pushed her brothers, knowing that the world would demand more from her, that mediocrity would never be enough. Every shot had been a test, every miss an opportunity to learn, every hit a step toward mastery that few operators ever achieved. The radio crackled in her ear, pulling her back to the present. Admiral Harlow's voice cut through, heavy with skepticism that had transformed into something more complex. Lieutenant Brennan, you have performed adequately on the first 2 engagements. But this shot is different. This is where natural talent ends and real skill begins. This is where you find out if you actually belong. The words hung in the desert air, weighted with implications that went beyond this single moment. This was not just about making a difficult shot. This was about proving something that should never have needed proving, about fighting for legitimacy that had been given freely to every man who had stood on this platform before her. Kira adjusted her position, feeling the platform shift and settle. Through her optic, the target wavered in the heat distortion, appearing and disappearing like something that might not be real at all. The wind gusted from her right, then shifted, coming from a different angle entirely. Reading the wind at this distance was as much art as science, requiring intuition built from experience. In the observation tower, Commander Thorne had finally found what he was looking for in her file. "Sir," he said quietly, urgency creeping into his professional tone. "You need to see this. Her qualification scores, her deployment record, the flags in her file are not accommodations. They're redactions, operational security classifications." Admiral Harlow glanced at the tablet, his expression flickering with something that might have been recognition or might have been concern. "What are you telling me, Commander?" "I am telling you that Iron Widow is not a dramatic call sign she picked for herself," Thorne replied, his voice low enough that only those immediately around him could hear. It was given to her by operators in the field. The designation is classified, but the reputation is real. The Admiral's jaw tightened. He looked back at the distant platform where Kira lay in her shooting position, suddenly seeing her differently, recalculating assumptions that had seemed so certain an hour ago. Around them, other officers were beginning to pick up on the shift in atmosphere, confusion and curiosity spreading through the observation deck. On the platform, Kira had no awareness of the revelation unfolding behind her. Her world had compressed to wind and distance, drop and drift, the 6-inch circle that represented the difference between legend and failure. Her breathing had settled into the deep rhythm that preceded long-range shots, her heart rate dropping as her body entered a state that was almost meditative. She thought about her first deployment, the shot she had made in the Horn of Africa that had turned a catastrophic ambush into a successful extraction. She thought about Afghanistan, about the night in the Karangal Valley when her rifle had spoken 4 times and saved lives that would have been lost without her. She thought about every door that had been closed, every doubt that had been voiced, every moment when she had been told she did not belong. This shot was for all of it. For her father who had taught her to be excellent, because adequate would never be enough. For the women who would come after her, who would face the same doors and the same doubts. For herself, for the right to stand on this platform and be judged by her skill rather than her gender. The wind steadied for a moment, a brief window of consistency in the chaos of desert air currents. The target shimmered into focus, a small black circle against tan background, impossibly far away and impossibly small. Kira's finger moved to the trigger, her breathing suspended, her entire being focused on the space between intention and action. Admiral Harlow keyed his microphone one last time. Last chance to withdraw, Lieutenant. No shame in admitting this shot is beyond your capabilities. Kira's finger continued its steady press, the trigger breaking clean and smooth. The rifle fired, the report sharp and definitive. The round left the barrel at 2,700 feet per second, beginning its long arc across the desert toward a target that seemed impossibly distant. The round traveled through 870 meters of desert air in just over a second, but time seemed to stretch and distort as every eye in the observation tower tracked its invisible path. The physics of the shot were brutal. At this distance, gravity would pull the bullet nearly 200 inches below the bore line. The wind, gusting and variable, would push it laterally in ways that required not just calculation but intuition. The heat distortion created optical illusions that made precise aiming nearly impossible. Kira remained motionless on the platform, her rifle still pressed to her shoulder, eye still against the optic. Through the magnification, she watched the target with absolute focus. At this distance, she would see the impact before she heard it, the speed of light outpacing the speed of sound. The moment stretched, suspended between action and consequence. In the observation tower, breathing had stopped. Admiral Harlow stood frozen at the rail, his hands gripping the metal hard enough to turn his knuckles white. Commander Thorne had abandoned his tablet entirely, every atom of his attention fixed on the distant target. Lieutenant Reeves had moved to the front of the crowd, his earlier mockery completely forgotten in the face of what he was witnessing. Chief Merrick's weathered face was locked in an expression of intense concentration, his professional appreciation for difficult shooting overriding any other consideration. The target erupted with the electronic signal of a perfect hit, the sensors registering impact dead center in the 6-inch circle. 870 meters. Variable wind. Unstable platform. 1 round. Perfect shot. The legend maker had just created another legend, and they had all watched it happen. The observation tower exploded with noise. Not celebration exactly, but the kind of stunned vocalization that comes when something impossible becomes real right in front of your eyes. Officers who had been skeptical moments before were now talking over each other, their voices raised in disbelief and unwilling admiration. The junior operators who had been so confident in her failure were staring at the target display screens, verifying what their eyes were telling them was true. Admiral Harlow stood silent, his face cycling through expressions too quickly to track. Shock gave way to something that might have been anger or might have been respect, then settled into a carefully neutral mask that revealed nothing. He had orchestrated this demonstration to prove a point, to put someone he considered an affirmative action candidate in her place. Instead, he had just witnessed a performance that would become part of SEAL training lore. Commander Thorne turned to the Admiral, his tablet extended. "Sir, you really need to read this. Her file has operational classifications I have never seen outside of Tier 1 units. Iron Widow is not just a call sign. It is a designation that requires approval from JSOC command level." The Admiral took the tablet, his eyes scanning the information that Thorne had finally managed to decrypt from the layers of security classifications. His face went pale, then flushed, as the full picture emerged from the redacted sections and coded references. Lieutenant Kira Brennan was not a diversity candidate trying to prove herself. She was an operator who had been working at levels that most SEALs would never reach, and her presence at this facility was not about evaluation, but about something else entirely. On the platform, Kira finally moved. She cleared her rifle, made it safe, and rose to her feet with the same controlled precision that had marked every action of the past hour. Her legs were steady despite the exertion and stress. Her hand showed no tremor despite the pressure she had been under. She looked exactly like what she was, a professional operator who had just completed a difficult mission with textbook execution. She descended the stairs at a measured pace, her boots ringing on the metal with mechanical rhythm. The course was complete. 3 shots, 3 impossible scenarios, 3 perfect executions. She had done exactly what they had expected her to fail at, and she had made it look routine. As she reached ground level, the range safety chief was waiting, his weathered face split by a grin that showed genuine respect. "Hell of a shot, Lieutenant. Hell of a run. I have been working this course for 7 years, and I have never seen anyone make it look that clean on their first attempt." Kira nodded her acknowledgement, but her expression remained neutral. She had learned long ago not to celebrate too openly, not to give anyone ammunition to accuse her of arrogance or poor sportsmanship. The mission was complete, but the real test was just beginning. She had proven her capability in a way that could not be dismissed or explained away, and now she would see how these men responded to having their assumptions shattered. The crowd from the observation tower was beginning to descend, a mass of bodies moving toward the course exit where she stood. She could see Admiral Harlow at the head of the group, his face still carefully composed, but his eyes showing something that had not been there before. Recognition. Possibly respect. Definitely recalculation. Lieutenant Reeves emerged from the crowd, his earlier swagger completely absent. He stopped a respectful distance from her, his posture subtly different than it had been an hour ago. He began, then seemed to struggle for words. "That was exceptional shooting, Lieutenant. I have run that course 3 times and never matched what you just did." Kira met his eyes, seeing genuine respect there for the first time. "Thank you, Lieutenant. It was a challenging course. Good design." Chief Merritt pushed forward, offering his hand. He did not say anything, but his firm handshake and direct eye contact communicated what words might have diminished. She had earned something that could not be given, only taken through demonstrated excellence. Commander Thorne arrived next, his expression complex and difficult to read. "Lieutenant Brennan," he said carefully, "I owe you an apology. Your file does not tell the full story, and I made assumptions based on incomplete information. That was unprofessional, and I regret it." Before Kira could respond, Admiral Harlow pushed through the final layer of observers. The crowd fell silent, sensing the weight of this moment. The Admiral who had orchestrated her public humiliation now stood before her, forced to confront the reality that he had fundamentally misjudged the woman in front of him. The desert sun beat down on them both, pitiless and bright, casting hard shadows across the concrete. Everything that came next would depend on how Admiral Garrett Harlow chose to respond to having been proven spectacularly wrong. Admiral Harlow stood before Kira, the desert wind tugging at his uniform, his face a careful study in controlled emotion. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of assumptions shattered and pride wounded. Around them, the assembled operators watched with the kind of acute attention that comes when hierarchy itself is being renegotiated in real time. Lieutenant Brennan, the Admiral, began, his voice tight but professional. He paused, seeming to search for words that would not diminish what they had all witnessed. That was an exceptional demonstration of marksmanship and tactical capability. The words came out formal and stiff, the bare minimum of acknowledgement, but they represented a seismic shift from the mockery that had started this day. Kira stood at attention, her face neutral, giving him nothing to work with except her silence and her record. Commander Thorne stepped forward, his tablet held like evidence in a trial. Sir, with your permission, I think everyone here should understand the full context of what we just witnessed. He turned to address the assembled group, his voice carrying across the concrete. Lieutenant Brennan's operational record includes 3 deployments with advanced task forces. Her file has JSOC classification markers that indicate involvement in operations most of us will never be clear to know about. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command, the level where operators became ghosts, where missions never made it to official records, where the most dangerous and sensitive work happened in shadows that even most SEALs never penetrated. Thorne continued, reading from his tablet. Her call sign, Iron Widow, was not self-selected. It was designated by her unit after an operation in Yemen, where she provided overwatch for a hostage rescue. When the primary assault team was compromised and pinned down, she eliminated 7 hostile combatants from an elevated position while under counter-sniper fire. The hostages survived. The assault team survived. She held that position for 4 hours until extraction was possible. The Admiral's face had gone rigid. Kira remained silent, neither confirming nor denying, but her lack of surprise told its own story. The designation Iron Widow, Thorne went on, refers to the historical term for women who lost husbands in combat but continued fighting. In Lieutenant Brennan's case, it references her role as the operator who keeps others alive when death is certainty without her intervention. She has been credited, through classified channels, with saving more than 40 operator lives across 3 deployments. Chief Merrick let out a low whistle. 40 lives. That kind of number meant years of combat at the highest levels, the kind of operational tempo that most elite operators never sustained. Lieutenant Reeves looked like he had been physically struck, his face pale as he processed the reality of who he had been mocking all morning. The Admiral took the tablet from Thorne, his eyes scanning the declassified portions of a record. His expression shifted as he read, each line apparently adding weight to conclusions he was being forced to reach. When he finally looked up, his carefully maintained composure had cracked enough to show genuine discomfort. Lieutenant Brennan, he said, his voice lower now, almost private despite the audience. Why did you not say something? Why did you allow me to treat you like a candidate who needed to prove basic competency? Kira met his eyes directly. With respect, sir, would have mattered? If I had told you my operational background, would you have believed me? Or would you have assumed I was exaggerating, claiming credit for team achievements, or benefiting from lowered standards? The Admiral opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. The truth was uncomfortable. Yes, he probably would have dismissed her claims. Yes, he had been so certain of his assumptions that no amount of words would have changed his mind. Only the undeniable evidence of her performance had forced him to see what had been true all along. I had to show you, Kira continued, her voice steady but carrying an edge that had not been there before. Words would not have been enough. They never are. So I ran your course, and I did what I've been doing for years. I performed the mission to standard. To standard, Chief Merrick repeated, shaking his head with something approaching awe. Ma'am, you just set records on 2 of 3 engagement phases and matched the record on the 3rd. That is not to standard. That is exceptional by any measure. Kira allowed herself the smallest hint of a smile. Standard for me, Chief. I do not have the luxury of being merely competent. I have to be exceptional just to be considered adequate. The words landed like artillery rounds, each one striking at the foundation of assumptions that had governed these men's thinking. Around the group, faces showed varying degrees of recognition and discomfort. They were being forced to confront not just their misjudgment of one woman, but the entire system of bias that had led them to that misjudgment. Admiral Harlow straightened, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed. The defensive stiffness had been replaced by something more genuine, perhaps even humble. Lieutenant Brennan, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you the respect that your record deserves and that I failed to give you from the start. He extended his hand. I was wrong about you. Completely wrong. Kira looked at the offered hand for a long moment. She could refuse it, could make him stand there with his hand extended while she highlighted every instance of his disrespect. She would have been justified, but she also knew that burning bridges with senior leadership, no matter how satisfying in the moment, would only make the path harder for those who came after her. She took his hand, her grip firm and professional. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. The Admiral did not let go immediately. For what it is worth, he said quietly enough that only those closest could hear, I hope you will consider this a learning moment for all of us. Myself included. Commander Thorne stepped forward again, this time addressing Kira directly. Lieutenant, your orders here were not actually about evaluation, were they? You are not a candidate. You are an instructor assessment, sent to evaluate our training protocols and identify deficiencies. Kira's expression confirmed what Thorne had deduced. The entire demonstration had been more than just her proving herself. It had been a test of the facility, of its leadership, of whether the most elite training programs in the military were ready to truly integrate female operators at the highest levels. And based on what I observed today, Kira said carefully, there is significant work to be done, not on capability standards, but on leadership mindset and institutional bias. The Admiral's face flushed, but he nodded. Understood, Lieutenant. Your assessment will be taken seriously. Around them, the assembled operators were processing the revelation. The woman they had mocked and dismissed was actually there to evaluate them. The demonstration they had watched with smug anticipation of her failure had actually been documenting their failure. The power dynamic had not just shifted, but inverted completely, and they were all still trying to catch up to that reality. The afternoon sun had shifted position, casting new shadows across the training facility as the reality of the situation continued to settle over the assembled operators. Admiral Harlow gestured toward the operations center, his demeanor transformed from adversarial to something approaching deferential. Lieutenant Brennan, perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private. I think there are operational details that need to be discussed. Kira nodded, following the Admiral toward the concrete building that housed the facility's command structure. Commander Thorne fell in a step beside them, his tablet still displaying the classified information that had rewritten everyone's understanding of the morning's events. Behind them, the crowd of operators dispersed slowly, their conversations animated as they processed what they had witnessed. Inside the operations center, the air conditioning was a sharp contrast to the desert heat. Admiral Harlow led them to a briefing room, closing the door behind them and activating the electronic security measures that ensured their conversation would remain private. He gestured to chairs around a conference table, but remained standing himself, his posture still formal but lacking the aggressive certainty that had characterized his earlier bearing. Lieutenant Brennan, he began, his voice measured and serious. Commander Thorne has shown me portions of your operational file, but I suspect there is significantly more that remains classified above my clearance level. What I need to understand is the full scope of your mission here and what your assessment will include. Kira set her rifle case against the wall and took a seat, her movements unhurried. My orders came directly from SOCOM leadership, she said. There has been growing concern about integration challenges at advanced training facilities. Not capability concerns, but cultural and institutional barriers that prevent qualified female operators from accessing Tier 1 opportunities. The Admiral winced slightly, but did not interrupt. My mission, Kira continued, was to undergo evaluation at this facility as if I were a standard candidate, to document how I was treated, and to assess whether the training and selection processes are genuinely merit-based or whether they contain systemic bias that disadvantages female operators regardless of capability. So today was, Thorne said slowly, a documentation exercise. You knew you could pass Course Delta. You have probably run harder scenarios in actual combat. This was about seeing how we would treat you before, during, and after. Exactly, Kira confirmed. And I have to tell you, gentlemen, the results are not encouraging. From the moment I arrived at this facility, I was subjected to assumptions and treatment that no male candidate with my record would have experienced. The mockery, the deliberate attempts at humiliation, the assumption that my presence was about diversity quotas rather than capability. Admiral Harlow sank into a chair, his face reflecting genuine distress. His entire career had been built on leadership and operational excellence, and he was now confronting the reality that he had failed at both in ways that would be documented in official reports that would reach the highest levels of military command. Lieutenant, what would you have done if you had failed the course? Thorne asked. I mean no disrespect, but Course Delta has broken experienced operators. What if the conditions had not been in your favor today? Kira allowed herself a slight smile. Commander, I did not come here hoping I could pass. I came here knowing I would pass. I have been shooting at distances over 800 meters for 10 years. I have operated in urban combat environments that make Course Delta look controlled and predictable. The question was never whether I could complete the course. The question was whether this facility's leadership would be professional regardless of my performance. And we failed that test, the Admiral said quietly. Long before you even took the course. Yes, sir. You did. The words hung in the air, unadorned and undeniable. Harlow leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant as he processed the implications. His career was not necessarily over, but this would be a permanent mark on his record, a documented failure of leadership that would follow him for whatever time he had left in uniform. Tell me about Yemen, he said suddenly. The operation where you earned the Iron Widow designation. Commander Thorne gave us the summary, but I want to hear it from you. Kira considered whether to share details that existed only in classified reports, then decided that these men had earned the full story through the harsh lesson they had learned today. It was a hostage rescue, she began. 3 American contractors held by a militant group operating in the mountains east of Sana'a. Intelligence suggested the hostages would be moved within 48 hours, so the timeline was compressed. She continued, her voice taking on the flat effect of operational debriefing. I was assigned as Overwatch, positioned on a ridgeline approximately 600 meters from the target compound. The assault team moved in during early morning hours, counting on surprise and speed. But the intelligence was compromised. The militants were waiting. Thorne leaned forward, his professional interest overriding everything else. An ambush. Yes. The assault team took contact immediately upon entry. 2 operators wounded in the first 30 seconds. The team leader called for emergency extraction, but the hostages were still inside and separated from our people. That was when I started engaging. You eliminated 7 hostiles from 600 meters, the Admiral said, under counter-sniper fire. That is not standard Overwatch. That is combat at the absolute limit of capability. Kira nodded. The first 3 were target elimination, suppressing the ambush positions to give the assault team time to recover. The next 2 were counter-sniper, taking out shooters who had identified my position and were actively trying to kill me. The final 2 were holding actions, preventing reinforcements from reaching the compound until our people could extract with the hostages. How long were you in position? Thorne asked. 4 hours and 17 minutes from first shot to extraction. I had to relocate 3 times as my position was compromised. I ran through 234 rounds of ammunition. When the helicopter finally pulled me out, I had 17 rounds remaining. The Admiral shook his head slowly. And the assault team? All survived. The hostages survived. 0 friendly casualties despite walking into a prepared ambush. That is when my team leader submitted the designation paperwork. He said I was the widow who kept death away from everyone else, even when it was hunting us all. Silence filled the briefing room, heavy with the weight of combat experience and hard-won survival. These were men who understood operations at the highest level, and they were finally seeing Kira not as a woman trying to prove herself, but as a peer whose experience and capability matched or exceeded their own. Lieutenant Brennan, Admiral Harlow said, his voice carrying a formality that signaled a significant shift. On behalf of this facility and myself personally, I want to offer not just an apology, but a commitment. Your assessment will be read and taken seriously. Changes will be made. This kind of leadership failure will not happen again under my command. Kira met his eyes, seeing genuine commitment there alongside the discomfort and regret. That is what I needed to hear, sir. Because the next woman who walks onto this range deserves to be evaluated on her capability, not her gender. She deserves to be challenged, but not sabotaged. She deserves the same respect you would give any operator who has earned it. You have my word, the Admiral said. And for what it is worth, you have my respect. You have earned it several times over. The briefing room door opened to reveal Chief Merrick standing in the corridor, his weathered face showing uncertainty about whether to interrupt. Admiral Harlow gestured him inside, the movement carrying none of the dismissive authority that had characterized his earlier interactions. Chief, come in. Lieutenant Brennan's operational status is now clear to facility leadership. Appropriate adjustments will be made going forward. Merrick entered cautiously, his eyes moving between the Admiral and Kira, reading the transformed dynamic in the room. Ma'am, he said, addressing Kira directly, the candidates are requesting permission to speak with you. Word has spread about your operational background, and there are a lot of people who want to, he paused, searching for the right words, who want to learn from you. Kira glanced at Admiral Harlow, who nodded his approval. The facility is yours to move through as you see fit, Lieutenant. Your assessment mission gives you authority here that supersedes normal protocol. She rose from her chair, following Merrick back into the corridor and out toward the common areas where operators gathered between training evolutions. The atmosphere had changed completely from the morning's hostility. Clusters of men watched her approach with expressions ranging from curiosity to respect to something approaching awe. The mockery and dismissiveness had evaporated, replaced by the professional regard that warriors reserved for those who had proven themselves in ways that transcended argument. Lieutenant Reeves stepped forward from one group, his earlier arrogance completely absent. Ma'am, he said, the formality in his tone marking a complete reversal from their morning encounter. I owe you an apology that goes beyond what I said earlier. My behavior toward you was unprofessional and disrespectful. I let assumptions override judgment, and that is not acceptable from someone who wants to consider himself an elite operator. Kira studied him for a moment, seeing genuine contrition in his expression. Your apology is accepted, Lieutenant. Use this as a learning experience. The next female operator you encounter might not have my operational background to force your perspective to change. She will still deserve your professional respect from the first moment. Understood, ma'am. Reeves hesitated, then continued. Can I ask you something about the Yemen operation? How did you maintain accuracy under counter-sniper fire? Most operators would have been suppressed, unable to effectively return fire while taking incoming rounds. The question was tactical, professional, the kind of inquiry that happened between peers try to learn from each other's experience. Kira felt the shift that represented the transition from being seen as an outsider to being recognized as someone with knowledge worth seeking. She spent the next 10 minutes walking through the operational decisions, the tactical positioning, the mental discipline required to shoot accurately when every instinct screamed to seek cover. Other operators gathered as she spoke, their questions becoming more technical and specific. They wanted to understand the ballistic calculations for extreme range shooting in mountain terrain. They asked about decision-making processes under time pressure. They probed for insights about maintaining composure when operations went catastrophically wrong. Each question was an acknowledgement that she had experience and expertise they lacked. Chief Merrick eventually interrupted the impromptu teaching session. Ma'am, Admiral Harlow has requested your presence at an all-hands formation in 15 minutes. He wants to address the entire facility about the events of today. Kira nodded, excusing herself from the group of operators who had been hanging on her every word. She made her way to the parade ground where formations were typically held, finding Admiral Harlow already there with Commander Thorne, reviewing notes on a tablet. The Admiral looked up as she approached, his expression serious but no longer defensive. "Lieutenant Brennan, I'm going to address some hard truths with the facility personnel. I wanted you to hear what I plan to say before I say it, in case you have concerns or additions." He showed her his notes, and Kira read through the planned remarks. The Admiral was not pulling punches. He intended to acknowledge his own failures of leadership, to explain the assessment mission that had brought Kira to the facility, and to announce immediate policy changes regarding how female candidates would be evaluated and treated going forward. It was more than she had expected, more than most senior officers would be willing to admit publicly. "This is good, sir," she said. "This is the kind of leadership that creates real change." Over the next 10 minutes, the parade ground filled with personnel from across the facility. Instructors, candidates, support staff, everyone who had been present for the morning's events, and many who had only heard secondhand accounts. The crowd numbered over 200, and their collective attention focused on the Admiral as he stepped forward to address them. "Personnel of Naval Special Warfare Training Facility 7, Admiral Harlow began, his voice carrying across the assembled formation. "Today, this facility experienced something that should make every one of us uncomfortable. We witnessed a failure of leadership, starting with me, that allowed bias and assumption to override professional judgment." The crowd shifted, surprised by the directness of the admission. Lieutenant Kira Brennan arrived at this facility as part of a SOCOM assessment mission. She was sent here to evaluate whether our training and selection processes are genuinely merit-based or whether systemic bias prevents qualified female operators from receiving fair evaluation. Based on the events of today, I can tell you that we failed that assessment badly. The Admiral paused, letting the words sink in. Lieutenant Brennan holds operational credentials that exceed most of ours. She has completed 3 combat deployments at Tier 1 level. She holds the Iron Widow designation for actions that save 40 operator lives across multiple combat engagements. And yet, from the moment she arrived, she was subjected to mockery, disrespect, and deliberate attempts at humiliation based solely on her gender. Faces in the crowd showed varying degrees of discomfort as the Admiral's words forced confrontation with their own behavior and attitudes. Today, Lieutenant Brennan completed Course Delta on her first attempt, with performance that matched or exceeded standing records on all 3 engagement phases. She did this while being actively set up to fail, with no preparation time, and under conditions specifically designed to break her. She succeeded because she is an exceptional operator, but she should never have been put in that position in the first place. Admiral Harlow's voice hardened. "Effective immediately, this facility will implement new protocols for how all candidates are evaluated and treated. Bias training will be mandatory for all instructors and leadership personnel. Any behavior that creates a hostile environment based on gender or any other protected characteristic will result in immediate removal from this facility. We are supposed to be the best of the best, and that means we evaluate operators on capability, not on assumptions." He turned to face Kira directly. "Lieutenant Brennan, on behalf of this facility and the Naval Special Warfare community, I offer our respect and our gratitude. You came here expecting to document our failures, and instead you gave us an opportunity to fix them. Thank you for your service and your patience with our shortcomings." The Admiral snapped to attention and rendered a salute that was immediately returned. Then, unexpectedly, he began to clap. Commander Thorne joined immediately, then Chief Merrick. Then the sound rippled outward through the formation until 200 operators were applauding the woman who had been mocked and dismissed just hours earlier. Kira stood at attention, accepting the recognition with the same composed professionalism that had characterized every moment of her time at the facility. This was not about personal vindication. This was about changing a system so that the women who came after her would not have to fight the same battles. The applause continued, genuine and sustained, marking not just respect for one operator, but acknowledgement that change was necessary and overdue. As the formation was dismissed and personnel began to disperse, Lieutenant Reeves approached one final time. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I hope someday I get the opportunity to serve with you in the field. I think I could learn a lot." Kira smiled, the expression genuine and warm. "Maybe you will, Lieutenant. Keep training hard and stay professional. That is how you get to the teams that do the work that matters." 3 weeks had passed since the demonstration that had transformed Naval Special Warfare Training Facility 7. Kira sat in her temporary office, reviewing the final draft of her assessment report before transmitting it to SOCOM headquarters. The document was comprehensive and unflinching, detailing both the systemic failures she had documented and the genuine commitment to change that had emerged in the aftermath. Outside her window, the training facility buzzed with activity that looked similar to what she had observed on her first day, but the underlying culture had shifted in ways both subtle and profound. Female candidates were now integrated into training rotations without the automatic skepticism that had greeted her arrival. Instructors were being held accountable for their language and behavior. The change was not complete, would probably never be complete, but it was real and measurable. A knock on her door announced Admiral Harlow's arrival. He entered with Commander Thorne, both men carrying the kind of formal demeanor that suggested official business. "Lieutenant Brennan," the Admiral began, "I wanted to speak with you before you departed. Your assessment report will reach SOCOM tomorrow, and I expect it will generate significant discussion at the highest levels." Kira gestured to chairs, and both men sat. "The report is fair, sir. It documents what I observed, both the failures and the response to those failures. Your willingness to acknowledge mistakes and implement change will be noted." Harlow nodded, though his expression remained serious. "I have been in the Navy for 32 years, Lieutenant. I thought I understood leadership. Today taught me that I still have things to learn, and that the hardest lessons often come from confronting our own blind spots." Commander Thorne leaned forward. "Ma'am, we have received authorization to share something with you. Your performance on Course Delta, combined with your operational record, has generated interest from DevGru. They are formally requesting your assignment to their selection pipeline. DevGru, Naval Special Warfare Development Group, SEAL Team 6, the most elite counterterrorism unit in the American military, operators who worked at the absolute pinnacle of capability. It was the assignment that every SEAL aspired to and few ever achieved." That is, Kira paused, processing the magnitude of what was being offered. "That is an incredible opportunity, Commander." The Admiral stood, his posture formal. "Lieutenant Brennan, you have demonstrated capability that belongs at the highest levels of our community. More than that, your presence at DevGru would send a message about merit and excellence that the entire special operations community needs to hear. I am personally recommending your selection, and I believe you will find strong support from leadership across the board." Kira felt the weight of the moment settling over her. This was not just about her career or her accomplishments. This was about opening doors that had been closed to every woman who had come before her. The first female operator at DevGru would face scrutiny and pressure that no male operator ever experienced. But she would also prove that the ceiling could be broken for those who came after. "I accept," she said, with gratitude for the opportunity and full awareness of what it represents. The Admiral extended his hand, and this time the gesture carried none of the defensive formality of their first meeting. It was a handshake between peers, between warriors who had earned each other's respect through the hardest kind of honesty. "Congratulations, Lieutenant. I look forward to hearing about your continued success." After the two men departed, Kira sat alone with her thoughts. She thought about her father, about the conversation in his study when she was 7 years old and determined to follow in his footsteps. He had warned her that the world would tell her no 1,000 times before it said yes once. He had been right, but he had also taught her that excellence was the only argument that could not be refuted. She thought about the women who would come after her, the daughters and sisters and mothers who were watching from wherever they stood in their own journeys. They would face their own battles, their own doors that needed to be opened, but each success made the next one slightly more possible. Her phone vibrated with a message from Chief Merrick. The candidates wanted to give you a proper send-off before you left. Would you join them at the team room? Kira made her way across the facility one final time, the Nevada sun setting behind distant mountains and painting the desert in shades of orange and gold. The team room was packed when she arrived, operators from across the facility gathering to mark her departure. Lieutenant Reeves was there, along with dozens of others whose attitudes had shifted from skepticism to respect over the past 3 weeks. Chief Merrick called the room to attention as she entered. "Ma'am," he said, "we want to present you with something before you head off to Virginia Beach." He held up a unit patch, custom designed with the Iron Widow designation and the facility's insignia. "This is not official, but it is heartfelt. You came here as an evaluator, but you left as one of us." The room erupted in applause as Kira accepted the patch, feeling the weight of acceptance that had been so hard-won. She looked around at the faces, seeing professionals who had learned to see past their assumptions and recognize capability when it stood before them. "Thank you," she said simply. "All of you. This place is better than it was 3 weeks ago, and that matters more than any individual accomplishment. Keep pushing each other to be better, to see clearly, to judge fairly. That is how we honor the teams and the mission." The gathering continued for another hour, operators sharing stories and asking final questions about tactics and techniques they wanted to understand before she left. It was the kind of informal knowledge transfer that happened between peers, the real education that occurred in the spaces between official training. As the evening wound down and Kira prepared to depart, Lieutenant Reeves approached one last time. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say that watching you over these past weeks, seeing how you handled everything with professionalism and grace, it changed how I think about leadership and excellence. I will be a better operator because of what you taught us." Kira smiled, placing a hand briefly on his shoulder. "Then my mission here was successful, Lieutenant. Take care of the people who come after me. Make sure they get the same fair evaluation that you would want for yourself." She walked out of the facility as the desert night settled over the training grounds, stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Her truck was packed, her orders were cut, and a new chapter was beginning. DevGru, the pinnacle, the next impossible door that needed to be opened. But as she drove away from Facility 7, watching it disappear in her rearview mirror, she felt something that had been absent for most of her career. Not just respect, though she had earned that. Not just validation, though that had come in ways that could not be dismissed. What she felt was hope. Hope that the battle she had fought would make the path easier for those who followed. Hope that excellence would continue to be the argument that changed minds and opened doors. If this story moved you, share your thoughts about your favorite moment, or tell us about a time when someone you knew proved all the doubters wrong. Drop a comment below and let us know what resonated with you. The highway stretched ahead into the darkness, carrying Lieutenant Kira Brennan toward whatever challenges waited at DevGru. But she was ready. She had always been ready. She was Iron Widow, and her story was just beginning.